As we begin Lamed Beis, we're searching up and down, right and left for a source for Ula's conclusion that when there's an overlap between Mammon and Malchus, you pay Mammon and you bought Malchus. So Ula has Xer Shov. Tachas Gomar. He has two parshios in which the word Tachas appears. Sivhach in the parsha of Ones. It says Velo Siela Isha Tachas Asher Ina. So we underline the word Tachas. Sivhach in the parsha of Chavola. Ayin, Tachas, we underline the word Tachas. Ma'ahasam, just like in the case of Chavola, where the Torah says, V'shifto yite v'rapa yirapa. It's Mamona Mishalim. But Milkalo Lucky, Afkal Hecha de Ika Mamonu Malkis, Mamona Mishalim, Milkalo Lucky. Now, according to the Girsa that we have in Agamara, Ula derives from Chavola for Kol HaTorah Kula, because it says Kol Hecha. So he's not just deriving it in that case of Tachas of Ones, where it says Tachas Asher Ina. However, Tosfos, Dibra Maschel Ella, says that according to the final conclusion of the Gemara, that Ula derives this from Xer Shava, we should assume that Ula holds that the din is that when you have both a Chiv Mammon and a Chiv Malchus in overlap, Eno Loke, only in those specific cases of Chovel, Edom Zomimim, and Ones. Okay, now at this point, the Gemara goes back to basics. We had, if you recall, a stira between our Mishnah here in Ksubas and the Mishnah in Makis about the case of Abal Achoso. Our Mishnah says he's Chayav Knas, and the Mishnah in Makis says he's Chayav Malchus. Rabbi Yochanan comes up with a whole new answer because he rejects Ula. Rabbi Yochanan holds that if you have an overlap between Mammon and Malchus, you get Malchus and you don't pay Mammon. Afilu Temachoso Nara, let's assume that even the Mishnah in Masechet Makis that formulates a Chayav Malchus is talking about Achoso Nara. So we have now all the necessary ingredients for Malchus. So now, how are we going to reconcile our Mishnah? Our Mishnah in Ksubas, if it's talking, is also talking about Achoso Nara, and yet the Mishnah establishes that you pay Knas. So Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that the Mishnah here in Masechet Ksubas that generates a Chayav Mammon of Knas, talking about a case where there is no Malchus. Why is there no Malchus? As opposed, in contrast to the Mishnah in Makis, where there was Asra, Anshe Hisrubo, but Khan here in our Mishnah, Lo Hisrubo. The Mishnah wants to address itself to the case in which there is no possibility of Malchus in the absence of Asra, and therefore he pays Knas. Alma Kasov Rabbi Yochanan, Kol Hechadika Mamadu Malchus, the Asrubo. If he got us, we have all the components necessary for Malchus, is Milko Loki, Mamona Lo Mishalim. So the Mishnah in Makis says Abol Achoso, which Rabbi Yochanan interprets with Asra, he gets Malchus, he doesn't pay any Knas. That's because Malchus trumps Mammon. But our Mishnah here in Ksuba is talking about a case of Lo Hisrubo. Hence, there is no Malchus. What you're left with is Mammon. And we're not denying that there's Chayav Mammon. We're only saying that when there's Malchus, like in the case of Hisrubo, then the Malchus, so to speak, like an umbrella, it overcomes the Chayav Mammon. The Chayav Mammon is always there. And if Lu Yitzuri, you remove the Chayav Malchus, like in the case of Lo Hisrubo, then Memela, what you're left with is the Chayav Mammon, and that's the Parsha Nas. Minole the Rabbi Yochanan, So what is Minole the Rabbi Yochanan ha? After all, I think Al Pisvar Rabbi Yochanan is 100% correct that Malchus should override Mammon, meaning Malchus is much more severe, physical corporeal punishment, 39 lashes. I mean, the Gemara says in Masechet Makis that you have to evaluate, give it to him in 3 different sections of 13 each, because maybe he'll die from the Malchus. So Malchus Dorais is a pretty serious business. But the Torah says, "U'b'chol ma'odecha." Do you remember that? Afilu notelos mamoncha yeshcha adam shebamono chaviv olav migufo. Some people, rather than lose their money, they would give up their lives. Modern mentality, but there is such a thing. But more likely, I think what the Gemara has in mind is that in the light of Ula, and Ula had Gzeira Shava, in theory, Rabbi Yochanan could have accepted that Gzeira Shava. He must have had some compelling reason why he didn't accept the Gzeira Shava of Ula. And the Gemara says, Amal Kra, in the Parsha Malchus, in Parshas Ki Tetzei, the Torah says, V'im Hoya, V'im Ben Hakos HaRasha, V'pilo HaShofet, V'go L'fon of Kedei Rishasa B'mispar, and it says Kedei Rishasa in the singular. And Rabbi Yochanan darshans the following: Mishum Risha Achas Atamachayv V'Yetamachayv Mishum Shtei Rishasa. We have an overlap of two rishas. So, for example, he was Baal Achoso, and he deserved Malchus for the rishus of Bias Achoso, and at the same time, he has a different rishus, and that is if she's on a nara, then he violated a nara, and for that he has to pay knas. So the Torah says, "Kedei rishasa, mishum rishachas." Choose one of the two. Okay, which one should I choose, Malchus or Mammon? Samechle. Now here's where Rabbi Yochanan darshan smichus, and immediately after the pasuk of Kedei rishasa, it says Arboim Yakena, and that smichus teaches me that in the case of an overlap of both Mammon and Malchus, that he gets Malchus, and it says Arboim Yakena. And that's going to knock off the chiyuv Mammon because it says Kedei Rishasa Risha Achas. You can only give him one punishment and not two. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yochanan, we understand very well Abal Achosu, the Mishnah Makis gets Makis, and he doesn't pay any Mammon. Okay, the Mishnah here in Elu Naris is talking about a case where there was no Asra. So the Gemara asks, now let's go back to all those cases, those paradigmic cases from which, in the Havamina, Ula derived his conclusion that you pay Mammon and you don't get Malchus. For example, Chovel b'chavero, he violates the Isolav of Lotosiv by giving a hakah to his friend, and he should get Malchus for that. But at the same time, the Torah says, Shifto Yitain v'Rapu Yerapeh, that he pays Mammon. And maybe you'll say the Torah is talking about a case of Heichadolo Isrube. Then it happens to be that although he violated the Isra of Altosif, but Pen Yosef, but nevertheless there was no Hasra, and that's when he gets Shifto Yite Varapo Yerape. Aval Isrubo Milka Loki Mamonolo Mishalme. Omarav Ami Omarav Yochanan Ko Hakosh Ein Bapruta. Now we now have a case where there is no Mammon, but yet there would be Malchus. And in fact, Rabbi Yochanan is quoted as saying in that case, Loke, he gets Malchus. Okay, that's very logical because even according to Ula in this case, he would get Malchus because there's no Mammon here that would knock off the Chi of Malchus. But Heichidomit, Gemara goes through a whole analysis of what the case is. Idolo Asrube, if he didn't have Asra, and he gave him a hakov less than a shava pruta is amai loke. If there was no asra, there's no malchus. So pshita, we must be talking about a case where there was asra, the asra. Now let's understand why is it that he gets malchus. And Rabbi Yochanan says the reason he gets malchus is because he hit him in a pachos mishava pruta. There is no mama. Time with the less shava pruta. It's the implication is that Mamon Mishali Milkalo lucky. So even though they gave him Asra for Malchus, and we know for sure we're talking about a case where there was Asra, nevertheless he pays if it's Shava Pruta, and he doesn't get Malchus. So now we're back to square one. We see that in Chovel B'Chavero, the Torah says he's Chayav Mamon and not Malchus. How could Rabbi Yochanan then go ahead and say that when there's an overlap between Mamon and Malchus, then he gets Malchus and he's not Mishalim? It can't be. And the Gemara answers that no. Even though as a general rule, when he's Chayav Mamon and Malchus, then we're going to derive from the Smichus HaParshas, that he gets Malchus, he doesn't pay Mamon. Chovel Chavero, there's a separate ribu in the Torah. Kidom Ravi Loi, Beferish Ripsa Torah, Edom Zomel Tashlumin, Achanami Beferish Ripsa Torah, Chovel Bechavero Tashlum. So again, what we're saying is that the universal rule, according to Rabbi Yochanan, is Loka Vena Michalan. There are two exceptions to that rule. That's going to be Chovel Bechavero and Edom Zomel. And in both cases, we're going to apply the principle of Ravi Loi, namely, that the Torah explicitly said that you pay. For example, Kasher Zom Lasos Liachiv in the case of Edom Zomim, and Veshivto Yitem Verapu Yirap in the case of Chov. So these two cases now become the exceptions to the rule because Beferish rips the Torah. What I'm not exactly sure about is why does the Gemara feel compelled to start with Edom Zomimim and apply that same logic to Chovel B'Chavero? I don't know why Edom Zomim got more of a pronounced, neon lights. We got the Edom Zomim, and then we can apply the same kind of principle of Ribsa Torah to Chovel B'Chavero. I mean, in both cases it was Ribsa Torah, whether it's in the case of Edom Zomim, Kasher Zom, in the case of Chovel Shivto Yitem Rap. He has another question. He's not part of my question, and that is why can't we combine Chovel B'Chavero and Edom Zomimim and make them into a binyan av from which we derive a kol Torah kula that you pay mammon and you don't get malchus. And this has to do with the rule, says the Ritva, of Shnei Ksubim Bam Kechad Ein Malam. And if the Torah has one case, then that din becomes paradigmic for all cases and it becomes a binyan av. If the Torah went ahead and took a second case and taught me the same principle, then we apply a different rule, and that is Shnei Ksubim Bam Kechad Ein Malam. Now we're going to go into an analysis of Ravi Law. Ravi Law made that statement that Beferish Ribsa Torah Edom Zomimim Limama. In what context did Ravi Law make his comment? On a Mishnah in Makis. Now this Mishnah in Makis is going to introduce, I believe it's on Daf Dalet, if I remember correctly, Shita Rabbi Meir, very fascinating Shita of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir has what's called Shnei Shemos. Sometimes you can violate two different Isurim and generate two different punishments with one mice, but it really is two Shemos. They're two separate entities that overlap almost coincidentally. And in such a case, we don't apply the rule of Kim Lebed Rabmina because each one operates separately. So when you have one Machayev that has both Mammon and Malchus, Mammon and Misa, etc., Kim Lebed Rabmina. But if you happen to have an overlap of two different Machayevim, for example, Edom Zomim, Me'idim Anu es ish ploni shechayev l'chaver masayim zuz v'nimsu Zomimim. So what happens over here? There's an overlap of two different things. He's testifying if he's Edom Zomim, a false testimony that's called Losana Brecha Eid Shaker, fine, Eid Sheker. And on the other hand, he was Machayev Ruven Pei Shimon Masayim Zuz. And that's kind of like a Bein Adam L'Chavera. As Rabbi Meir, a unique sheet of Rabbi Meir, codified in the Mishnah at the beginning of Malchus, Lokin and Mishalman, he gets both. He gets Malchus for violating Losana, and he pays Mammon to this person who was about to suffer a loss of Masayim Zuz. And why do we have no problem here of one to the exclusion of the other? As we said before, they're two different shemos. There's an overlap here of two different violations. I would again use this terminology, just and one is bein odom l'makom and the other is bein odom l'chavero. Eid sheker is in and of itself something that the Torah despises, and for that sheker you deserve malchus. On the other hand, you did something to your friend, bein odom l'chavero, although again it's kasher zon v'lo kasher asa, but nevertheless you wanted to do that to him. The Torah says for that attempted loss that you wanted to impose upon your friend of 200 zuz, pay him 200 zuz. We have an absolute rule that tolerates no exception, that when you have an overlap of Mammon and Malchus, you get one and not the other. And which one will you get? you'll get tashlum. Why tashlum? After all, according to the logic of Rabbi Yochanan, we would have said he should get malchus. V'nei mishakol located mishalim. Why not say they should get malchus and that'll knock off tashlum? And here's where Rav Hillel made a statement, attaching it to that Mishnah of the Chachamim of Rabbi Meir, beferish ribs the Torah themselves tashlum, heichen ribs the Torah. Okay, so kashnzom lassos liachiv doesn't necessarily mean that you pay mama, but rather, if you take a look at the rest of the pasuk, it says, with regard to meting out the punishment to the Edom Zomim, it says, Lo sochus einecha, nefesh b'nefesh, ayin b'ayin, shein b'shein, yad b'yad, regel b'regel. Lumally, why did the Torah have to add these words, yad b'yad? They're completely superfluous. It says that we give ayin tachas ayin, shein tachas shein, regel tachas regel. Why do you have to add yad b'yad? And the answer is, Dover anite miyad liyad, my new mama. So miyad liyad means mama, which is given from one hand to the other. And the Edom Zomim have to pay this mama. And that's called the Ferish Ribs Torah Edom Zomim Lamam. By the way, you know, I don't have to tell you, there's an organization called Nefesh B'Nefesh. They bring people here on Aliyat Eretz Yisrael. In the original biblical Nefesh B'Nefesh, we're talking about taking the lives of Edom Zomim because they tried to take the lives of someone else. What does that imply about Aliyat Eretz Yisrael? I don't know. Anyway, Chovel b'chavera, how are you? Chovel b'chavera nami michti ksiv kasher osa kein yasa lo. Just what you wanted to do to him, that's what we're going to do to you. That's the famous drush of Ayin Tachasayim Momon. And how do we know that Ayin Tachasayim means Momon? The pasuk says Shever Tachas Shever, Ayin Tachasayim, Shein Tachas Shein. What is Nesina here? Why does the Torah add these words to emphasize Nesina? Lamali. Why did the Torah have to add those words? Dover sheyesh bo Nesina. Umayniu mama. So this is the same kind of analysis that we saw in Rav Hillel with regard to Edom Zomim. We have it now in Chovel b'Chavero, and that's called Beferish Ribs Torah. The Torah says you pay mamon and you don't get malchus. Rabbi Yochanan, my time alone, ula. What about ula's zereshava? Tachas. Im kain, Rabbi Yochanan holds that if ula is correct and you're going to insist on accepting this zereshava, and that would mean that ba'al achoso is potter from malchus because he pays mamon. Except in the one exceptional case of a Yisoma Mi'aviyah. But let's assume like a Nara Yisoma Mi'aviyah. So, and if it was Mefuta, and therefore she could be Mocheles. But other than that, there's always going to be a Chiv Mama in every other case. And Rabbi Yochanan is turning to Ula and he's saying, according to your logic, can be a chiv mama, there won't be a chiv malchus. Yet he violated a terrible law. That's Tzanis and Karis, but there was Asra for malchus of Baal Achotza. Is Vitalta Ervas Achoska Lo Sigala. You've now done away with the malchus for this law. Every lav in the Torah, theoretically, except for maybe lav Shein Bo Maisa, lav Shenitil Tatuvin, lav anything less, every lav in the Torah generates malchus. And now you're taking Achoso out of the bag because you're saying since there's a Chiv Mamon, therefore there's no Chiv Malchus. And therefore Rabbi Yochanan is more inclined to leave out the Zereshov of Tachas and apply the exact opposite rule, namely that when there's an overlap between Mamon and Malchus, you get Malchus and you don't pay Mamon. And that, my friends, really takes us to the next stop, which is Lamed Gimel. So we'll just start the next stop. The Gemara asks a kash on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan agrees that in the case of Chovel b'Chavero, we have the Beferish Ribs Torah, Mamon, and the Torah went out of its way to say Shifto Yite V'Rapi Yirape, that he pays Mamon, and he doesn't get Malchus. Now, every case of Chovel b'Chavero violates a law of Pen Yosef. And according to you, Rabbi Yochanan, you have a principle that you can't be mavatal a lav and take it out of the entire entity of Malchus. But in Chol v'chaver nami in pain bitalto lo Yosef, pen Yosef, and there won't be any Malchus. Let's go a step further, Rabbi Yochanan. What about Edim Zomim Nami? The Torah says, yad b'yad, you pay the moment, and you don't get Malchus for violating Lo Sana B'Yachet Shoker. In Pen Bitalta, you've now completely undermined the lav that generates Malchus in the case of Edim Zomim. And it says, Vayim bin Hakos HaRosh. In the Parsha of Edim Zomim, it says that we give you Malchus. So there's Malchus in Edim Zomim, because he violated the lav of Lo Sana B'Yachet Shoker. So what are you doing now? You're telling me pays Mammon, and you're completely undermining the entire law as far as Malchus is concerned. So the Gemara says the following. You know what? I'm going to show you that there are cases in which, both in Edim Zomim and Chol v'Chaver, you will get Malchus, and therefore there's no application of the rule of Bitalta Malchus. For example, in Edim Zomim, let's take the case of Efshekayim ben Grucha ben Chalutza, where we don't have Kasher Zomim Lassus Liyochiv, because the Torah says Vasisem lo v'lo lezaro, so we can't make you into a cholol because that would be machal yozera in the case of a kohen. So now we have to suspend the entire onesh of kasher zoma, and in such a case, if there's no kasher zoma, then we go back to the violation of Lo Sana B'Yachet Shoker, and you get malchus. So it's not like bitalta and you've taken the lav of Lo Sana B'Yachet Shoker and completely removed it from malchus. Here's a case where Einachinami, the Edim Zom will be chayiv malchus. We can't make them into a ben gruchim and chalutz like they wanted to do to the victim. And chol v'chaver nami. There's no shabbat pruta. Therefore, there's no key of mammon. Torah considers less than the shabbat pruta is not mammon, and therefore you can get malchus for violating pen Yosef. If that be the case, then Rabbi Yochanan, you have no right to say that in the case of Baal Achoso, if we apply Ula, I object, because then you'll be mevatel the lav of Baal Achoso from Malchus. Achoso nami ikal kiyume b'achoso bogeres. In the case of bogeres, there is no knas, and if there is no knas, then there's Malchus. So here's a case of Baal Achoso, and you get Malchus. So you do violate the law of Achoso, and it does generate Malchus in this case. So why are you making a big deal against Ula and objecting that Bitalta, Toras, Malchus? It's not so. Again, in the case of Achoso Nara, then he pays and he doesn't get Malchus. And that's based on Ribsa Torah of Ula of Tachas Tachas. Now we're back to square one. Why does Rabbi Yochanan object to Ula? Ula is really, in a sense, through Tachas Tachas, applying the same principle that we saw in both Edim Zomim and in Chovel v'Chavero. Namely, you're not being mavatal the lav from Malchus because there are scenarios in which you have Malchus. And if we apply that here to the case of Baal Achoso, then using the principle of Gzeret Shova of Tachas Tachas of Ula, then we have a situation of Bogeres, and in the case of Bogeres, there is no mammon, and therefore, if so facto, it would be Malchus. So why are you objecting against Ula and rejecting the Tachas Tachas? The problem is that I simply don't have the Gzeret Shava, and I don't have the luxury of the Gzeret Shava. And the reason for that is because I need the word Tachas to derive Abaye's conclusion. Yomer Abaye, this is sugya later on in Daf Mem. And the question is, how do we know? Chamishim Kesef. And also Boshes Upagam. Maybe when this is Gemara later on, maybe the Gemara, when the Torah says Chamishim Kesef, it swallows in, includes in it Boshes Upagam. How do you know that this Boshes Upagam on top of the Chamishim Kesef, maybe it's included in the Chamishim Kesef? Omar Krod. the Torah says, "V'nosano isha shochevi mal avia nara chamishim kesef, v'lo sia leisha tachas asher ina," right? The parsha in Kitetze is high when the Torah says, "V'nosan isha avia nara chamishim kesef." Is that chamishim kesef is tachas asher ina, only because ina. And ina means the actual beer, but there's also boshus v'gam. And boshus v'gam, which is not inui, and applies to every case of a chavol of chova b'chavero. So then I need that pasuk to teach me, don't entertain the principle of chamishim kesef is all inclusive. No, the chamishim kesef is tachas asher ina, but it doesn't cover boshus v'gam. Is memela the pasuk here of tachas asher ina in the parasha of Onis is not what we call mufna, and if it's not mufna, we don't have the luxury of using it for Gzeira Shava. And finally, just to end for today, the Ula, and Ula who does have the Gzeira Shava tachas, which means that tachas Shar'ino is not mufna, how is he going to derive Abai's conclusion that the Chamishim Kesef does not include Boshus V'gam? Nafkale, he derives it, Mida Rava, the Amar Rava, Amar Kra, V'nasan, Ish HaShochev Imol Avi Anar Chamishim Kesef, and the Torah adds the word Hashochev Ima, indicating that the Chamishim Kesef is related to the Shochev Ima, which is called Hanosh Chiva. Hanosh Chiva Chamishim Michlal de Ikabosh V'gam. The Torah is telling you that the Chamishim is being paid as a knas for Hashochev Ima, meaning for Hanosh Chiva, implying that there are other payments and compensations that is the obligated in, and those are Boshes Upagam. So obviously the Chamishim Kesef does not swallow up within it the Boshes Upagam. Those are separate, independent monetary compensations. So this is where we're going to stop for today. And I'll wish you a Shabbat Shalom. So the next time I think we meet will be Monday morning. So we'll try to fill in one or two blot over the next few days, although it's very, very difficult. You have Shabbos and you have Tisha B'Av. I'm going to have to get up very, very early on Monday in order to fill it, in order to fill in that missing gap. But we'll see what we do. And if not, we'll learn Lamed Gimel. Okay, then. So have a meaningful fast, and we should be zochet to Binyan Beis Hamikdash, the end of Churban, the end of Golus, and the Bais Hashlishi b'mheir v'yameinu. Amen.